Hello, fifth grade. So today we're going to do our last lesson on from chapter 6, which is the settlement of Plymouth, or I should say the last lesson about the three early English colonies. So I'm going to go through the reading, and again, we're going to go through the packet, paying attention to any vocabulary words we need to find for this chapter. The settlement of Plymouth. The third English settlement in North America was started by people who were looking for religious freedom. King James I said that everyone in England had to belong to the Church of England, but some people refused. Among them were people called the Separatists, a group that wanted to have a separate or independent church. The Separatists decided to move to a place where they could be free to practice their own religion. In time, this group became known as the Pilgrims. In September 1620, the Pilgrims sailed from England, traveling on a ship called the Mayflower. After more than 2 months at sea, they landed on the tip of Cape Cod in what is now Massachusetts. Before going to shore, the Pilgrims drew up a plan of government. They wrote down a set of rules called the Mayflower Compact to help them live together peacefully. After most of the men signed this agreement, they elected John Carver as governor. After exploring the area, the Pilgrims decided to sail the Mayflower across a bay that separated them from the mainland. They landed at a place they named Plymouth. Soon they began to build houses and a meeting hall called the Common House. The first winter was very difficult. The Pilgrims had landed too late in the year to plant crops, and they faced a cold and hard climate. Nearly half of the 102 Pilgrims died of disease and starvation before spring. Only a few settlers remained healthy enough to care for the others. In March 1621, the Pilgrims' luck finally improved. A man named Squanto, a member of the Pawtucket tribe who was living in the nearby Wampanoags, visited the Pilgrims. Some years later, Squanto had lived in England and could speak English. Squanto stayed in with the Pilgrims and taught them how to plant corn, catch fish, and get sweet syrup from the maple trees. The Pilgrims were so grateful that they taught Squanto had to be sent by God. Squanto also told the Pilgrims about the many American natives who had died from disease that they had caught from English and French fishermen. While Squanto had been away in England, the members of his Pawtucket tribe had died from this sickness. Another American native who visited the Pilgrims was Massoit. He was a sachem, or chief, of the Wampanoags. Squanto helped arrange a peace treaty or agreement between Masonite and the Pilgrims. The Wampanoags and the Pilgrims promised not to fight each other. They also agreed to protect each other against attacks by other native Indians. The Pilgrims' corn ripened during the summer, and in the fall they held a feast to give thanks for the harvest, the food they had collected from the plants they had grown. Masonite and the other Wampanoags came to the celebration with deer to cook and eat. The Pilgrims had goose, duck, deer, fish, lobster, and wild turkey. The Thanksgiving feast lasted 3 days. Today, people in the United States still observe this harvest celebration on the holiday called Thanksgiving Day. In 1621, John Carver died, and the Plymouth needed a new governor. William Bradford was elected to the post. He was governor of Plymouth for more than 30 years. In the next few years, ships brought more and more settlers to the colony. In time, other groups would join the Pilgrims in the new area now called New England, Massachusetts. There's a picture of them on the ship. This is part of the Mayflower Compact. A lot of women and children were the original settlers as well. It's a picture of the treaty with the natives. I'll just read the lesson summary before we wrap up. In this lesson, you learned that about the first English settlements in North America. You found out why England wished to have American colonies and why settlers left to live in the colonies. You learned why some settlements survived and why others did not. The early settlers faced many difficulties. England's first settlement on the island of Roanoke disappeared completely. Another settlement, Jamestown, survived through numerous hardships. Settlers often did not have enough food and developed illnesses from the unhealthy surroundings. At times, local natives helped them, but at other times, the settlers and the natives fought. Many settlers were searching for riches. Others, like the Pilgrims, hoped to find religious freedom. The Wampanoags helped them survive in Plymouth. These early settlements were first of what would become the 13 English colonies of North America. All right, let's stop right there. So the vocabulary words we have, colonist, I think was also from the beginning of this chapter. We didn't do it. So a person who settles in a colony. The Mayflower Compact, a set of rules written by the Pilgrims to help them live together peacefully, and Plymouth, a place in Massachusetts where the Pilgrims settled. So be sure you get those definitions, and then we'll move on to the next sections of our packet. So our first question is, why did settlers come to Plymouth? And it says here that in England, everyone was forced to follow the Church of England. And so some people were called separatists because they wanted to have their separate and independent church. So they were able to receive a charter from the king to set up their own colony in America. And real quick, this having their own religion, we have our Bill of Rights and, our first freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. That freedom of religion and that freedom of speech comes from these early colonists. And the reason why the 13 colonies eventually become settled, as we learn about each of the 13 colonies and why they all get settled, a lot of them were seeking religious freedom. A lot of them were seeking a way to have a voice from the king's tyrannical rule. So, those Bill of Rights that we have, those first 10 amendments, come from a lot of these early pressures of living under tyrannical rule of the king, whether it's King James or King George during later on in American history during as the start of the American Revolution. Why was it important for the settlers to agree to the Mayflower Compact? Well, when we start reading about Jamestown, we find out that one of the big issues of Jamestown was the conflict between the commoners and the English gentlemen, those who were the people from the Virginia Company, and them saying, we have the right, we're the rule of law, you have to listen to us, we're the noblemen. So learning from the earlier problems that other colonies had, they were able to realize, okay, we need to agree on a set of survival rules that we were all going to be able to get along. So the Mayflower Compact was important because it was able for them to have a set of rules that they all agreed on in order for them to live peacefully together. And we also have to keep in mind there's no police, there's no king, there's not necessarily a full governor. So they need to have these rules in place to make sure that everyone's being held accountable despite rank or ability, societal class. What hardships did the settlers have when they first arrived? So it says here the first winter was difficult. They landed too late in the year to plant crops, and they faced a cold and hard climate. And many of them died of disease and starvation. That's a hardship, if you tell me. What mistakes did settlers make in the beginning to make survival even more difficult? Well, they built a common house. So I think the problem with the common house is that they were in close quarters. So the reason why disease and starvation spread, or not starvation just ran out, but diseases spread easily when they're in one common area. And they didn't plan the trip out properly, so they weren't able to land in time to farm. I think they learned their mistakes from previous settlements, so there were people there who were able to build, and so they built their homes first. They weren't looking for gold, so they didn't dig for gold instead of building. So they learned a few of their mistakes, but the timing didn't necessarily help them. How did American natives in the area treat settlers when they first arrived? So it says here Squanto was helpful in helping them reach peace with the Wampanoags and teaching them to farm and helping them to arrange a peace treaty. And arranging a peace treaty with the Wampanoags. What was the improvement that made this settlement successful? So I think I'll start from the beginning. So one of the improvements was that they made a treaty before they landed to a set agreed rules. They worked with the Pilgrims and accepted all the help they can get and were able to have peace with them in order to share their land and know how to use the land properly in the ways that helped the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims get along. So the Mayflower Compact and agreed rules and laws to follow, a peace treaty with the natives, and the Wampanoags teaching Pilgrims how to survive on the lands around the Plymouth. All right, so here's a quick little truth about Thanksgiving here.